I think we're live. Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Consul Agranov. We're starting the Q&A about the consular questions. Unfortunately, I can't see you, but you can see me. So it's a one-way street. First of all, we ask everyone to submit the questions through the Google Sheet that we add to the description of this Q&A. And now you can ask your questions in the feed or message us directly. Before I begin, I just want to emphasize that our consulate is dealing with the New England region. It means Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island, Maine, Vermont, and New Hampshire. I would love to answer questions from people from other regions that other missions, Israeli missions, are dealing with. But unfortunately, we have so many requests from our region that we don't have a manpower to answer specific emails or people that will come to our mission. So we'll ask everyone to submit your requests through your regional consulate or embassy. So first of all, let's start. I want to say in the beginning that there is new requirements of entry to Israel that started in the beginning of April. And from the beginning of April, all our missions, including our consulate, are swamped with requests of people of entering. Now our waiting time in our consulate is 2 weeks, more than 10 business days to answer just an email that we got. And it's applied to everyone, to American or to Israeli, to every question that we got. We don't have practically the manpower to deal with that almost 400,000 Jewish Jews that we have in our New England region, and more than 40,000 Israelis that many of them have questions how to enter to Israel to visit their loved ones. So let's start. First of all, to go to Israel, you need to do a PCR test. Without this test, they will not let you in on the plane. Not other COVID test, PCR test. I just want to emphasize it because some people had a problem with this. When you come to Israel, even if you did your COVID vaccine before, you would need to start with quarantine. You will start with quarantine until you'll get an approval from the Ministry of Health to finish the quarantine. If you got your vaccine or you were sick before, it's relatively easy to be approved to finish your quarantine. You just need to do a serology test, antibody test in Israel. There is many private companies that can go to you, take your blood and do this test, or you can go to one of the hospitals, Israeli hospitals. After we will put on the feed of this Facebook all the official laboratories that you can do there the antibody test. But as I said in the beginning, there's private companies that come to your house, do it in your house or in the place that you will stay. And then in a couple of hours, you're getting a response, an answer, and then you will get an approval from the Ministry of Health to get out of the quarantine. And this is the entrance. So now I will say what's the requirement for Israelis. For Israel, every Israeli citizen with Israeli passport can book a flight and go to Israel. This is the two requirements that he would need to apply to. First of all, the PCR test before he's flying, prior, not more than 72 hours before the flight. And this, when he lands in Israel, he or she, when they will land in Israel, they would need to do the antibody test to finish their quarantine. There is also approval for people that have first-degree Israeli relative to go to Israel. It's mean people that their mother, father, one of their siblings are Israeli citizens, and say they want to go and visit their loved one. So unfortunately, and this is where we are stuck, and there where we are the gatekeeper, those people need to get a permit to enter Israel through us, through one of the consulate or the embassies. So it's means that you need to apply to your regional consulate or embassy of Israel. You need to supply some proof that you have a first-degree relative. Most of the time, it's a birth certificate or marriage certificate. There is no, this is the right way to prove that you have a first-degree relative. You need to be vaccinated, fully vaccinated. So it's meant to send us your vaccinated card, the small thingy that you get from CDC. You need to have an insurance that will state that it also cover COVID-19 cases abroad. You would need to sign affidavit that we will send you, or you can find on our site, on our other mission site. And this is for a straightforward family member of first-degree Israeli. There is now also new requirement for children of Israeli citizens. Here I want to emphasize that by Israeli law, every citizen, his or her children are automatically becoming Israeli citizens. So it's by birth. It's not something that you need to apply to. So all those Israelis that have children and didn't register them, those children are just unregistered Israeli citizens. They are not non-Israeli citizens. By Israeli law, they are getting the citizenship on the birth to Israeli citizen. This is the law. So now the requirement, and it was always the requirement that every Israeli citizen should enter the state of Israel with his or her Israeli passport. It's the same with other countries. It's the same with the United States. You should enter United States with your American passport if you're American. So until now, many Israelis didn't register their kids, and not always the border control in the Ben Gurion airport found that those kids are Israeli citizens. Now, because everyone needs to have a permit, it's very easy to see if those kids are Israeli or not. And from April, the requirement were that every one of those kids should be registered fully, be issued an Israeli passport, and only then those kids can enter, and kids, I mean, people until age 18, can enter Israel. Now, in this Sunday, I would say, there is a little bit of the restriction. If you have children that you didn't register, you can start the registration. It means that you need to send us all the documents, send the birth certificate. You can send the birth certificate in the beginning without the apostille, and also send an affidavit that you are promising that after you will return from your trip, you will finalize the registration of your kids. It means that you don't need to come personally to the consulate and register your kids, and until age 18, every minor need to come physically to get his or her passport. So you don't need to do this process before your trip to Israel. You can finalize it after you return. And this is the requirement. You can do everything by mail or email, just to sign this affidavit, send information, birth certificate, and other documents to start the registration of your kids, and then you can finalize it after you'll come back from your trip to Israel. So this is a general framework that we are now working on. I just want to say that this is a new wave of new requests is delaying our services, not only for those people, but also for other services that we give in a consular section, passport issuing, registering of newborns, registering of marriages. Everything is delayed because it's the same staff that dealing with all those requests. All the literally thousands of requests that we are getting from from Americans, and this is why our service is delayed and taking us more than 2 weeks to answer your email or process your passport. So we ask, as I said in the beginning, we ask some of you, we ask all of you, but some of you submitted the questions through Google Sheet, and I will ask my my co-worker, our head of our PR, Eshia, to read those questions, and I will try to answer them.
Okay, let's go. Here's an Israeli citizen who's saying that they are fully vaccinated. Do they need to quarantine when they arrive to Israel?
So I think I answered this question. Actually, let's not read the question that I already asked, answered those questions. Those people just need to do an antibody test in Israel, and then and they need to be in quarantine until they'll get their approval to get out. Most of the time, it's a matter of a couple of hours.
Okay, here's a family that they want to bring their young grandchildren to Israel who are unable to be vaccinated. Can they come to the state of Israel?
Grandchildren are not first-degree relative. You can bring your immediate family. For example, if you have a brother or sister in Israel, it's a first-degree relative, you can bring yourself, your spouse, and your kids, no grandkids. And yes, if we're talking about a regular family, as I described before, one of the family members have a first-degree relative in Israel, and they want to bring their kids, they can bring their kids, but the kids will need to be quarantined for 14 days.
Okay. There is a question here regarding bringing dogs. Last year, there were rules about bringing in dogs. You had to sign a form. Do you still have to sign a form? Are there other restrictions for bringing pets into the state of Israel?
So it's always nice to do this Q&As, because sometimes you get questions that you never been asked before. First of all, this is a question for Veterinary Service of Israel. I would advise you to ask them directly, because it's not a requirement of Ministry of Interior or Ministry of Foreign Affairs. But to tell you the truth, I don't see any change in the policy of entering Israel, so I don't think that there is any change in this requirement about dogs, but I would advise to check it with the Ministry of, I think Ministry of Agriculture is dealing with the veterinary service, yes.
Does the state of Israel recognize the J&J vaccine for visiting Americans?
To apply for a permit, yes. And as I described the process in the beginning, when you in Israel, you need to do an antibody test. So this antibody test will test if your antibody is working or not. It's a very vague thing, because some people, maybe the first responders that got their vaccine in the beginning of the year or even in December, maybe those antibodies are not there anymore. The science is not fully there to know if half a year it will stay, if the antibody will stay. But yes, to get a permit and to enter Israel, it's enough to get a J&J 1 vaccine.
We have a few Israelis who are asking that they have an Israeli passport. They would like to be able to get a green passport upon arrival to Israel. Is that possible?
So this is the question to the Ministry of Health. Most of the time, you're getting a green passport only if you did the vaccination in Israel, but you will get, if you will prove to the Ministry of Health that you have antibodies, you will get a permission. And it's like a green passport, yes.
Okay. There's a person who's asking about their health insurance. How do I find health insurance in Israel? Mine does not cover me there.
And there is so many different health insurances that work. We have Israeli companies that give health insurance. We have international companies that gives insurance and that also works in Israel. So just Google it. I can't give you one company that you need to go. There's many providers that can give you this service. I just want to say that this video will stay on our site, on our Facebook site, and you can watch it later if you miss something.
What paperwork do I need to enter the state of Israel, and how long does it take to get an appointment at the consulate?
It's depend what's your situation. If you have a first degree family member, you need to apply. You don't need to go to the consulate. You can do everything by mail. Just send the information that we're requiring. And you can find it on most of our sites. Most of the sites of different consulate have whatever consulate is requiring. If you don't have a first degree relative, you can't go to Israel as a tourist still. There is talks that from the end of May, there will be permits for groups of tourists to enter Israel, but there is no details yet about this. So if you have a first degree relative, you need to apply by mail, email, through one of our missions. If you just want to tour Israel, you can't for now.
Okay, that answers quite a few questions. If I'm a US citizen and I'm looking to visit a first degree relative in the state of Israel, will my family be able to join me?
Yes.
I've already answered that, yes.
Your immediate family, yes. And you would need to send us your marriage certificate and birth, some proof of birth certificate, some proof that those people are your immediate family. But yes, immediate family can use one first degree relative in Israel to enter together.
Can I go to my grandson's bar mitzvah in Israel?
I would assume this grandson have parents that also Israeli citizens. I don't think that the kid's living alone in Israel. So if his parents are in Israel and they are Israeli citizens or permanent resident, you can ask to get a permit through them, yes.
Do you know when someone who is fully vaccinated will be able to visit second degree relatives in Israel without a quarantine?
It's a very good question. I would advise you to follow Israeli news. As if you're following, you can see that it's really changing every week. It's not like CDC that deciding every 3-4 months to change their policy. In Israel, everything is very, very, the pace is very fast and everything is changing rapidly. I don't know about changing to the second degree relative. I would think that we will open to the tourist and we won't go to second, third, and fourth degree relative because it's much more difficult to prove. And I hope that after this pilot project with the tourist groups in the end of May, and we will see that there is no new variants coming to Israel, I would think that they will try to ease the requirement for a general tourism. But again, nobody knows what will happen. Nobody knows how and what variants will be in United States, in Israel, and elsewhere, and how it will, and what the situation will be in each country. There is now, for example, people from India and a couple of other countries. I think Ukraine also can't enter Israel because there's outbreak in those countries. So we don't know what will happen in the United States. We don't know what will happen in Israel. So everything is like, my crystal ball is not working today, so I can't tell you what to expect.
There's a request here from a parent who says, what about Israeli parents who do not wish for their children to be citizens? What is the process with that?
So there's no process. As I said in the beginning, your kid is an Israeli citizen by birth to an Israeli citizen, just unregistered Israeli citizen. If you wish, you can, the process is, because they are already an Israeli citizen, you can register, you need to register those kids by Israeli law. Every change in your personal life, marriage, divorce, and birth of kids, you need to submit all the necessary document to the Ministry of Interior in 30 days. So you didn't do your part to register their kids on time. What you can do, if you really want it, you can register them and then asked to enter Israeli citizenship. This is the only way for those kids to enter.
There is a group here who are 12 to 15. They're looking to do a group study tour as academics. Will they be allowed to enter the state of Israel? And does the state of Israel recognize US vaccine cards?
So about the vaccine cards, we are not recognized cards, we are recognized antibodies. We're looking not on the papers, we're looking on the de facto vaccination. If you have antibodies, you won't need to continue your quarantine. If you don't, it's irrelevant if you got a vaccine or not. About students, first of all, you can apply and get a student visa. It's mean apply to one of the universities in Israel. If you will apply to one of the universities, will be submitted to this university, you can get a student visa, and then you can get a permit to enter Israel. There is no entering for groups yet. The groups entries will start only in the end of May, and we didn't got still the process for it. I would think it will work directly through Ministry of Interior, with one of the providers in Israel would need to apply for a group permit. But we are not there yet.
Okay, if you're a couple or a family, when you're applying to the consulate to fly to the state of Israel, do you need to apply separately or can you apply together?
So every consulate do their own requirements. For our consulate to New England, you can apply together.
How long in advance should I submit a request to visit a first degree relative in Israel?
It's a good question. I forgot to mention it in the beginning, but the permit that we give valid only for 2 weeks. So if you're planning to go to Israel in June, July, or August, it's too early to submit your request. And also, I don't know if the requirements will be the same. So I would advise to submit your request 3 to 4 weeks before the planned visit.
How can I get an entry permit to Israel for my domestic partner?
If you are an Israeli citizen, you can ask to apply. You just need to prove that you have a relation, like a real relationship. It's not just a friend that want to tour Israel. You need to, and again, every consulate will give you information which documents you need to supply. But documents is a list that you are having together, bank accounts together, some proof of relationship.
There is a question regarding on how to get in contact with the consulate. Can they do so via phone? And if they're emailing, how long should they wait to receive a response?
So with our consulate, you can, would advise you only to reach out to us by email, and we will put our email in the feed. The consular department is consulardep@boston.mfa.gov.il. But other consulate or embassy may be working a different way. We don't have manpower just to answer phones. So we ask everyone to send us or a message through Facebook or an email. And now it's almost 14 days to answer an email.
If I have family in the state of Israel, can I quarantine with them for 14 days?
You can quarantine with people that will have, if this family have a separate room with a separate bathroom and the toilet, of course, yes, you can do it. But it's depend on the number of people that live in this household. You can check it in the site of the Ministry of Health. They have, I think, very comprehensive explanation what the requirement for it.
If a couple are fully vaccinated, but the children are not, can we shorten the isolation period with PCR test?
You can shorten it to 10 days. So if you'll do an exam in the beginning, like PCR test when you come to Israel, and then PCR test, I think, and again, those requirements also changing all the times, but there isn't a way to do a PCR test in the middle and shorten it to 10 days. But 10 days is the minimum you can do it.
Are there any new BT tourist visa requirements for US permanent residents with passports from countries requiring visas? In this person's case, it's Ghana.
What is BT?
A B2 tourist visa.
Oh, B2, no tourist visa, only if you have some reason. There's no tourist visa to anyone, and there is no tourist permits. So now, let's explain it easily. Before, Americans or people didn't need a visa to enter Israel. Now everyone to enter Israel need two things. One is visa, but if you're coming from country like United States, that is there's a visa waiver to Americans, so they don't need a visa, but everyone need a permit. So there's no permits for tourism to Israel. So I'm sorry, but you would need to wait when we'll start to open to tourists.
Is the rule for registering your kids in effect now and forever, or is it temporary just during the coronavirus?
The rules was there for forever, but there was no enforcement before. The rules didn't change. Every Israeli citizen should register their kids not less than 30 days after their birth. So it wasn't just enforced in the border. Now we are just enforcing the law. It's nothing new.
Do you have any information on if and when LL flights from Boston will resume?
It's a very good question, and I would also want this to be answered. Unfortunately, first of all, they closed the station here. They released all their people, so I don't think it will happen in immediate future. They closed also a couple of other lines to United States. I hope when they will return, let's say this way, I don't think it will start before regular tourists will be, or Israel will be open to tourism. When Israel will be open to regular tourists, I think maybe El Al will reconsider, and we will do our best to make them reconsider opening this line again. But nothing in the immediate future, unfortunately.
There's a few people here who've gone ahead and booked flights, and they haven't gone through the consulate. Is there a way to get an emergency appointment?
No, we are trying to work with everyone applying by the order they applied. I don't think it will be fair to people that apply 2 weeks in advance to delay their request because someone bought a ticket without thinking that they need a permit.
There's a question here that, do you need to have health insurance that covers you for COVID when you visit Israel if you're a US citizen?
Yes, this is one of the requirements. To get a permit to enter Israel, you need to, in your application, part of the application is to submit your international health insurance covering COVID. And just to add my 5 cents, I think every time that you're going international, I would advise you to have health insurance.
Okay, but what if my health insurance doesn't cover COVID? It will be enough to get a letter that says it doesn't cover COVID?
No, you would need to get another insurance that cover COVID. There are many options for buying an international insurance that covering COVID. Unfortunately, we have many hundreds of requests, and everyone find a way to get an international insurance. You can apply to one of the Israeli companies that will give you local insurance that covers also COVID, or one of the American companies that dealing with travelers abroad. There is a variety of options to solve this problem.
Someone's asking if they need any kind of special certificate as an American citizen who is married to an Israeli in Israel.
You would need to send us your, first of all, if you are registered in an Israeli registry and we will see this information, it's enough. Most of the time when you were married in Israel, the Ministry of Interior will write that Israeli citizen have a non-Israeli spouse without giving an information about the spouse, his name or his date of birth. So you would need still to submit your some documents proving us that you did it. But again, it's case by case, and we will need to check it in the registry.
If I land in Israel, am I able to quarantine in Airbnb?
Yes. And just to emphasize that, I would advise to check it in advance a couple of days before you come, because the requirement changing every time. I remember last year, most of the time they didn't let you to quarantine in Airbnb, and they insisted that you will go to the hotel that the Ministry of Health provided. So now I think they let people to do it on Airbnb, but these things changes very rapidly. And this is a decision by the Ministry of Health, not Ministry of Interior or Ministry of Foreign Affairs that I represent. So I would always advise before your flight to go to their site and check their requirements, because you don't want to find you're in this position. But there's always, I won't say always, but until not long ago, there was always a solution to go to an hotel that will be supplied by the Ministry of Health.
Okay, I'm an adult Israeli, and what I'm looking to see is how long will it take to renew my Israeli passport?
If you are applying to our consulate now, because of those new requirements and new workload that we are dealing with, it's taking more than 2 weeks to renew your passport.
What if I have a permit, if I have a flight, but I don't have my permit on time to fly? What do I do?
Delay your flight. It's just like going to country that you need to visa for it. If you don't have a visa, you won't fly to this country. It's the same with Israel. If you need to fly to Israel, if you want to fly to Israel, you need to acquire the permit in advance.
There's one person who's asked that they are a mixed couple. One is American, one is Israeli. The American citizen does not agree with the child becoming Israeli. Is that something that's taken into consideration?
No, because as I said many times in this Q&A, these kids already Israelis. Without approval of the other spouse, by the Israeli law, those kids that born to the Israeli citizen are automatically getting an Israeli citizen. Those kids are just unregistered Israeli citizens. It's something that they have. It's their birthright.
I have a spouse that is in Israel. It was approved to be in Israel and is currently in Israel. Can I travel on her approval?
It's depend on, it's a very interesting question, because you are not saying on what permit he or she has in Israel. But if your spouse is in Israel and he or she don't have an Israeli citizenship, this spouse need to go to the Ministry of Interior and apply through them to the permit for you.
Okay, I think there were some Hebrew questions as well that maybe you wanted to touch on.
Do we have something in the feed, on the feed?
No, but in the original document, the Google Forms.
Okay. One second. I just want to say to people that joined us, we are here in, my name is Daniel Agranov. I'm a consul of Israel to New England, and we are answering consular questions. Okay, I will read the questions in Hebrew, and אתם מכריחים אותנו להוציא לו דרכון, ואז מקשים בדרישות מגוחכות להוכיח הורות. וזה בשעה שאח של מישהו שגר בארץ ואינו בן של ישראלים יכול לקבל אישור תוך זמן קצר לעלות על המטוס. Okay, it's not a question, it's a complaint. Yes, איך אני יכולה להחליט מיום ליום ואמצא את עצמי ללא דרכון תקף. אם אכנס לארץ עם דרכון לא תוקף, אצטרך לבלות במשרד הפנים בארץ, וניתן לשער, זה כך חודש או יותר. כשאסע לשבועיים, איך יוצאים מהפלונטר? I can't see all the question. I think it's if I understand the question correctly, this person is asking, it's taking too long to get a passport, and if he want to go immediately. We are very sorry that it's taking so long to us to answer, to issue a passport, but we are trying our best, and there is no other way. And you are not, it's not right. In Ministry of Interior in Israel, sometimes I heard from people that just did it. It took them less than 2 weeks to get a new passport, and there is always an option to do there is an option in the Ben Gurion airport to issue a passport in like 1 day. Okay. אני אזרחית ישראלית עם פספורט שפג תוקפו. האם יש אפשרות להיכנס לארץ עם הפספורט? האם אוכל לחדש את הפספורט בארץ באחד מסניפי משרד הפנים? האם אפשר לחדש לנמל תעופה? All the questions are yes. Yes and yes. Yes, you can enter. Israeli citizens can enter Israel with their not valid passport and renew the passport in Israel or in the airport. The only problem, and you need to check it with your air company, because the especially American airlines have very rigid requests. If you're Israeli citizen, you need to use your Israeli passport to enter. So from point of view of the state of Israel, yes, you can enter with unvalid passport. You can't exit with unvalid passport. You would need to renew it in Israel. But yes, but you would need to ask your airlines if it will be okay by them, because they have their own requirements, and I don't know if it will be enough for them. Okay.
And I have a few more in the feed.
1 second, let me finish with this one. במקרה של בן זוג לא ישראלי, האם צריך להגיש את תעודת הנישואים מישראל מתורגמת לאנגלית? לא צריך לתרגם לאנגלית. If you're married and you have a marriage certificate in Hebrew, you can submit it in Hebrew, and for this process, for approval to enter Israel, we don't ask for apostille. Okay, and the two last one. 1 second. Oh, it's a long one. שלום, בני ישראלי הנשאו לאישה אמריקאית ויש להם ילדה. אנחנו מנסים לקבל אישור לכלתי ונכדתי לבקר בישראל כבר מספר שבועות ולא מצליחים. חמותי מאושפז בבית חולים ואנחנו רוצים לבקרם ולאפשר לפגוש את מינתה שלא פגשה עדיין בשל הקורונה. האם יש אפשרות לקבל אישור מיוחד? אני בהתכתבות עם דורית ומחכה לתשובה, תודה. So it's someone is asking from Maryland. And again, I am a consul for New England. I don't know what's the situation in the embassy, but I would think that they have the same problem of huge number of requests, and we are, and I'm sure they're also dealing by the request, like first come, first served. You can try to reach out to the embassy and ask them, where is your request? But I'm sure in a week or 2 or 3 after you applied, you will get your permit. And this is the last question from here. אני מחוסנת, אבל ילדיי הישראלים לא. האם אני מחויבת בבדיקה סרולוגית? האם אני נכנסתי לבידוד איתם? 10 ו-14. כמו כן לבעלי, אין אזרחות, האם יכול לבקר הקיץ בארץ? Yes, first of all, you can enter, your kids can enter, and your husband can get a permit. You need to apply for a permit. And yes, your kids need to be quarantined in Israel. kids most of the time can't be quarantined without their parents. It's depend on the age. 10 years old, I don't think that they will be quarantined by himself. So you would need to stay with him or her. But this specific question, I would advise you to ask the Ministry of Health. They have a site and they have an email that you can submit questions. I don't know answer to medical questions. And yes, when you're entering Israel, you would need to do a serology test, the antibody test. So I'm done with the questions in Hebrew here. Yes.
Okay, so how should citizens and non-citizens navigate travel to Israel if different Israeli consulates in the United States have differing policies?
I don't heard that other embassies or consulates have different policies. We have one policy. All the information are publicized on the site of the Ministry of Interior that give us the right and the requirements. We are working like an organs of the Ministry of Interior abroad. We are not deciding on our policies. The only thing that every consulate can ask for maybe different documents, or maybe some consulate asked you to fill more paperwork. But this is a requirement. Every consul, as myself, can decide what's their requirement level. But the general requirements are the same, and we are working by the same requirements. So if you can give us an example of what you're referring to, maybe I can answer it. But generally, we are working by the same requirements by the Ministry of Interior.
Can we submit the request for entrance permit via email, or do we need to schedule a meeting?
Only via email. You don't need that for a permit. You just need to send all your information and all the required document through email. Yes, you don't need to come.
If my children are 2 and under and they don't have Israeli citizenship, but me and my husband are Israeli citizen, what do we need to do? I suppose it's the same process you explained before.
Yes, you need to start the registration. You need to send the birth certificate. And just as I say before, I want to emphasize, your kids are Israeli citizens, just unregistered Israeli citizens. You need to start the process. If you don't have the time to finish it before your flight, so you can you can get a permit for your kids to enter Israel if you will sign an affidavit that you promise to finalize the process after your trip.
I am married to an Israeli, and I only have a photocopy of my wedding certificate. Usually copies cannot be apostille. What can I do?
We are, and again, because we are trying to make it easier and to ease on the people, this, in most of the cases, if it's legal documents, even a copy of the legal documents, we will accept it without the apostille. I want to also emphasize one point. Until mid-April, we asked all the documents that that we're getting as part of the application to be with the apostille. Now we took the requirement off. You don't need to submit the documents with apostille. You just can submit a copy of the original document, and it will be enough.
What if I applied for 3 weeks in advance, but I still didn't get the permit? What do I do? I hope you will get your answer in the upcoming days. As I said in the beginning, our consulate and all the consulate and embassies in North America and experience a huge load of requests that we just can't deal with it in a normal pace of 5 business days. So it's taking us sometimes more than 2 weeks to answer questions. And I'm sorry for it, but there is no other way for us to deal with those requests. We're dealing by first come, first served, and this is what we are trying to do. How do I renew my expired Israeli passport? It was issued in New York, but I now live in Massachusetts. Do I need a notary signature? Can it be a notary at the local UPS?
I don't understand why you need a notary to apply to renew a passport. You need to send your old passport and you can do everything by mail. You can find all the information on our site. You just can mail it to the consulate in Boston. You don't need to come in person and you don't need to. And again, there are specific reasons, maybe if you're under 18 or it's your first Israeli passport, but if it's then you need to come in person. But if it's your not a first passport because you had one from New York, I don't see any reason for you to come. Just read on our site how to apply to renew your passport by mail.
Do we need to mail or email forms for permit to entry?
Email. You can also mail as you wish, but email and mail will be answered similarly. And as I said a couple of minutes ago, we are now accepting non-original documents, copies of original documents. So it will work also through emails.
Is the Ministry of Interior accepting NGO invitations of clergy and/or volunteers? If so, will the consulate process an A3 visa or a B4 visa application?
Yes. The process should be as it was before. Those organizations should submit their request to the Ministry of Interior in Israel. If the Ministry of Interior will approve it, it means that we, the consulate or the embassy or the other mission, will get the approval from the Ministry of Interior. We will issue the visa together with the permit.
This is a question you've halfway answered, but it's about an unregistered Israeli child. And what about the army?
It's the question that I love so much. First of all, there is no requirements for Israeli citizens that live abroad to serve in an Israeli army. There is a mandatory service, but when your center of your life are not in Israel, you are not obliged to go to an army. When you are 16 and a half, you would need to apply to your nearest consulate or embassy to ask to delay your service. And then when you're 22 or 26, and depend on your men or women, you will your service will be canceled. This is it. This is the only requirement that you have as an Israeli abroad. You don't need to. There is a mandatory service in Israel, but only for people that their center of their life is in Israel. In those time until your service will be canceled, you will have limited. You have, I think, 3 months that you can enter to Israel in a year, not more than a year. If you will enter for a longer time, you would need to start your service. But if you go to a visit of 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, a year, you won't be affected by this delay.
What are the
just don't be afraid, people. There is no Mishtarat Tzvai, there is no military police, Israeli military police going around Massachusetts and governing Israel to put them in jail.
What are the regulations right now for babies under 1 year? I'm assuming this has to do with COVID and entering in with COVID and the rest of it.
They can enter. Like I think they refer to the previous requirements that were changed in the beginnings of this week, that kids under 1 year could have applied for a permit without registering the kids. So now, because everyone can apply for the permit without the register, just start the process. It's the same about 1 year.
This is from an adult. They're an American citizen, but they are the child of 2 Israeli parents. Do they need an approval to travel to Israel or not?
They are Israeli citizens. By Israeli law, if both your parents are Israeli, you are Israeli. So they just need to register you. If I understand correctly the question.
Yeah. What is the approximate timeline to get an approval to enter with a child to the state of Israel? Can I book a flight and then 2 weeks from the day get the request?
If the question is from Massachusetts, it's take us more than 2 weeks to process questions. I would advise to book a flight a month from the time of your application, not less than a month. But I just want to to share with you my experience, and again, I'm not sure it will continue, but nowadays, most of the airlines give you an option to delay or cancel your flight with no fee attached. So it's not such a big hassle to delay or cancel your flight if you won't get a permit on time. And again, we all hope it will work, but I would advise to apply, as I said, 2 to 3 weeks before your flight, and give yourself another week.
If I received my original passport in New York, but now I live in New England, where should I send the application?
To us, of course, to us. And again, you can send to New York. I'm sure they would be happy. But most of the time we're working regionally, and you can send, you can submit it through mail, as I answered a previous question. You can send it to us. You can read on our site what is the way to do it, and the rest is history.
Will I receive my permit via email?
Yes. You will receive it via email, and we will send this approval to the airport, to the Ministry of Interior, and to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And this way they will know that this is an original copy of a permit that we issued, and you can enter freely.
If we are Israeli citizens, do we still need to get COVID insurance?
Israeli citizens don't need any COVID insurance. They don't have they don't need a permit, so they don't need to apply for a permit and submit all the documents. But as I told in the previous questions, I would advise everyone that going abroad to have a health insurance, just for your sake, not a requirement.
This is another one about the kids. So for kids, is it all kids under 18 must renew in person, or was it all kids under 18 and first passport renewed by mail? Let me read the whole thing out. So kids,
it's like
all kids under 18.
As we say in Hebrew, it's a salat of many different questions. So kids until age 18 need to come in person. Also, first passport need to come in person. So it's the same. It didn't change. This is the requirement. I think it's also the requirement in the United States. So this is the requirement for us for renewing children passport, or if to have your first passport, you need to come in person.
Is the child of an Israeli citizen that is a second generation born outside of Israel still considered an Israeli citizen?
So a second generation, no. It's second generation. If your children were born in the United States, they are Israeli citizens. But if their kids were born also in the United States or in England or in France, it's irrelevant. Yes, the second generation that born abroad don't get in Israeli citizens. They need to make aliyah.
So just to make sure, if the embassy didn't send me the permit for my kids, I can still travel and sign the promise to finish the process there?
No, you still need the permit. Part of the getting the permit, you would need to send the affidavit to the embassy or the consulate, but you can't enter. Everyone that don't have an Israeli passport can't enter Israel without the permit. It's an obligation that airlines checking when you're going to the plane, if you have Israeli passport or you have the approval. If you don't have one of those, you can't enter. You can't fly to Israel. So you would need to get an approval. You don't need to finalize the registration of your kids. Yes, you can stop the registration process and just send them the affidavit and ask just to get a permit, and then finalize it when you come back, but you still need a permit for your kids.
Is Medicare insurance sufficient?
It's ask the Medicare if they covering international international, if it's international and it's covering COVID internationally, it will be enough for us. I'm not checking. You should check with your insurance what they cover. If they will issue me a letter that they are covering international, if you're sick internationally and it's including COVID, I don't care if it's Medicaid, Medicare, or CVS. I don't care who will give you the insurance.
I think someone's looking also for some clarification regarding renewing an Israeli passport. Can it or can it not be done in the mail?
Renewing of Israeli passport can be done by mail. It's a very relatively simple process. You need to fill an application. If you have you can do it if you didn't lost your previous passport, it wasn't stolen, or you are not a minor. If it's a regular situation, you have your old passport, you will send it to us with the application, with the payment form, pictures, and then you can do it by mail. You don't need to come.
I applied for a visa with my husband who is not Israeli. Will I receive the approval via email or mail?
Visa is one thing, entering permits is another thing. If you apply for a permit, you are getting it by email. If you applied for a visa is something that you put in your passport, so it will be through mail. So it depends what you ask for.
Does even a 6-week-old baby need a permit?
Every person that don't have an Israeli passport need a permit. It's irrelevant. The age is irrelevant.
Does an unregistered Israeli child need to get an Israeli passport after they register?
Yes, this is the way to enter Israel, but it's not mandatory. If you register the kid and they are staying in United States, you don't need to get them a passport. You can just do the registry. And to register the kid, you don't need to bring them to the consulate. But to get a passport, you need to bring them to the consulate. And to enter Israel, every Israeli citizen by law obligated to enter Israel with Israeli passport. So you can register them, and you don't need to issue them a passport until you plan to visit Israel.
What is the tax policy for minors who are registered as Israeli citizens but live permanently outside of the state of Israel?
There is no requirement by Israeli law. We're not like IRS. If center of your life is not in Israel and you are not paying your taxes in Israel, there is no tax enforcement by Israeli authorities.
So kids that are getting a permit to enter, since as established, they are Israelis by law, do not need a specific additional health insurance. Is that correct?
Yes, because they enter in as an Israeli citizen, but still, I would advise to get insurance, especially for kids.
My daughter's Israeli passport is expired. She is 6 and we can't get an appointment to get a new passport. What can we do?
There is no other way. You need to get an appointment.
And I think there's a few Hebrew comments that you might want to look through.
So first of all, we planned this event only for an hour. So I'm just opening my Facebook. So we will finish like in 10 minutes if there will be no more questions. 1 second, let me enter. Okay, let's see. Hebrew. האם בניו יורק ניתן להנפיק דרכון מהיר? No, there is no option to do a fast passport. You can always enter it, as I answered before, you need to check it with your airlines, but Israeli citizen can enter Israel with old passport. You just need to check it with your airlines if it will be sufficient for them that your passport is expired. So this is the only Hebrew question that I see. Okay.
There's a few other English ones, if I may.
Okay, will be the last questions.
Okay, no one is picking up the phone. How can I get an appointment?
So and again, I'm answering only for our consulate of Israel to New England, covering 6 states of New England. We asked everyone to apply through email. We will put our consular email in the remarks to this video, and you should apply through this email, and then we'll schedule you an appointment if you need one.
And I'm seeing some need for clarification. When you say that there's 10 to 14 days to get back to you, is that answering the email, or is that completely processing the request from start to finish?
Unfortunately, answering the email.
Okay.
We are trying to do it faster, but we just don't have the manpower to do much more. We're trying. I'm bringing people from other departments to help us in the consular affairs, but we're doing our best. We can't do more than that.
Traveling to Israel, could I travel via Ukraine or Turkey, which are both in the red zone?
It's a very good question. They now decided that people that coming from, I don't remember about Turkey, I remember about Ukraine, that there is no flights from Ukraine. So I wouldn't think that there is flights that coming from those countries. I think the flights will be delayed. I would advise you to check those questions specifically with the requirements of Ministry of Health. If people that are only in the airport and didn't enter the countries, if they still wouldn't enter. But I would think that there will be no flights from those countries. So I would advise to ask the specific question, the Ministry of Health, yes. Because their requirements and those things also change every day.
Do you want to take one more?
Yes, the last one.
How long, I know you've answered this before, but maybe it needs a bit of clarification. How long before the flight should we apply for a permit?
We are trying to, we are advising everyone to apply not less than 3 weeks before the flight. If you will apply 4 weeks before the flight, it will be even better. It's taking us 2 weeks to answer emails and answer questions. Most of the time, if people sending everything needed in the first email, it will be a relatively fast response, and you will get it in a day or two after your email is reviewed. But if it's like many questions, it can take more than a week just to process your request. So not less than 3 weeks.
Okay.
Okay, so thank you, everyone. I hope we answer most of the questions. I'm sorry if we didn't get to all the questions. And I'm very sorry that it's taking us so long to answer your request, your emails, and your renewing of passport on different other services that we regularly do. As you maybe know, in a regular year, we are trying to answer in a matter of days and maximum a week. Now, unfortunately, it's taking much longer. First of all, because we are working still in capsules. It's been like an Israeli system. We work day on, day off, and from home, it's not always possible to answer all the questions without looking at the registry. But also, we have a much more requests from Americans to enter Israel, and this just clogging the system. And we are again very sorry that it's taking us so long, and we are doing our best. Shana Haba b'Yerushalayim. Thank you, everyone.